Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whenever, wherever you're listening. Thank you so much for making me a part of your day. My name is Lee Parham. You might know me as Lego Lee or Lego Lee 329 from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Patreon, wherever you name it. I'm all over the internet. And this is the Brickology podcast, the study of small plastic bricks. And thank you guys so much for tuning in today. This is the 4th episode of Brickology. Unfortunately, I missed last week's recording of Brickology. I wanted to do a podcast, but I ended up going out of town, and I have an absolutely horrible excuse. The reason I did not record an episode of Brickology last week is because I was at Disney World. Yeah, that's seriously my excuse. I didn't record Brickology because I was at Disney World. Pretty selfish, but worth it. Absolutely. Super fun time at Disney. But Brickology is not about Disney. It is about Lego. But we are going to mention Disney today on this episode of Brickology. And this is the 4th episode of Brickology. And you know, I feel like 4 is actually a more significant number than you might think. Because when you make 3, so you make 3 movies, it's a trilogy. And usually trilogies, they end, right? You have your trilogy and that's it. You move on. But once you have a 4th movie, it's like all of a sudden you go from being a trilogy to a series. And now you're really talking. Like there's a lot of movies. Like 4 is a lot of movies in a series. So the 4th episode of Brickology kind of makes me feel like, hey, you know what? We're making it. Like, we're here. Brickology is officially a podcast series. We have a decent sample size catalog, and I'm pretty happy about that, and I've been very pleased with how the first few episodes have gone. The views on YouTube, not great, but the Spotify stream, I think we're over 140 streams right now, which to some people probably sounds like absolutely nothing. There are people who get 140 streams a minute on their podcast. But I literally just started this. I'm fairly new to the podcast game, and I'm pretty happy with the response I've gotten thus far. And I'm very excited about the episode of Brickology I have prepared for you guys today. Now, I mentioned this on last week's episode of Brickology. I also mentioned it on the 2nd episode of Brickology as well. I want to keep Brickology as topical as I possibly can. Now, there are 100% going to be some weeks where there's nothing topical to talk about. Sometimes weeks are just boring and nothing new comes out in the world of entertainment or the world of Lego. And, you know, next week might be an example of that, and you'll just have to wait and see what next week's episode of Brickology will be about. However, this is not one of those weeks. This week has a very, very topical thing. It's not like the episode 2 weeks ago about NASA where it's like, well, Lego just released one NASA set, so I'm going to talk about NASA. No. This week, a whole thing is launching, and that's the reason why I'm talking about it. You might know what I'm catching on. Obviously, if you've seen the title, you know what's up. This week's episode of Brickology is about Lego Star Wars The Clone Wars in honor of Season 7 of The Clone Wars coming out today, February 21st, Friday, February 21st, 2020. Today is the release date for Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 7 on Disney+. And in honor of that, I'm talking about all the Lego sets based off Star Wars The Clone Wars. Now here, real quick, right before I actually jump into the meat of this episode, I do kind of want to answer a question that I've gotten a few times from a few viewers. A couple people have asked me, especially after I did my first episode on these sets based off episode 1 of Star Wars The Phantom Menace. People asked me, hey Lee, are you going to do all the Star Wars movies Lego Brickology episodes in order, chronologically? Initially I said yes. However, because The Clone Wars is coming out today and I have not gotten an opportunity to record the Attack of the Clones episode, I'm going to break the chronological order just for this episode. So after this episode, the next Star Wars episode will be about Attack of the Clones, and we'll get back on track with the chronological order of things. But for this week, we're just going to break it by jumping ahead one series and doing the Clone Wars before Attack of the Clones. But don't worry, everything will be in a chronological order from here on out. Now here on Brickology, I like to break down kind of the history of the thing I'm talking about before I dive into the Lego sets based off it. And there's a very interesting history surrounding the Clone Wars TV series. It's actually more in-depth than you might think. Now, the Clone Wars show that I'm mostly going to focus on in this episode is the Cartoon Network show that a lot of y'all, my viewers now, grew up with, including myself. And of course, I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. However, there's actually a show that preceded that had the exact same name called Star Wars: The Clone Wars that premiered in the year 2003. Now, 2003 was exactly 1 year after Episode 2 Attack of the Clones had come out, so, clone troopers and all these, Jedi and all of this stuff, the battles between clones and droids, was very prevalent in the media. So Lucasfilm capitalized with this animated series about the Clone Wars. And of course, the Clone Wars is something that's been referenced literally since the beginning in Star Wars lore. In Episode 4, Luke references Obi-Wan and the Clone Wars, which is very interesting. And I don't know if George Lucas had this all planned out where the Clone Wars was literally going to feature clones of Jango Fett as troopers. Who knows the answer to that question, but the Clone Wars was something mentioned in the original trilogy of Star Wars, and finally in the prequel trilogy, we had that explained to us what the Clone Wars is, the war fought with clone troopers. Now, the original animated series of the Clone Wars is very different, vastly different than the series that you're all used to. This series came from the creators of Samurai Jack. Samurai Jack is an absolutely fantastic cartoon show that also came on Cartoon Network in the early 2000s that I watched a good bit. It's kind of a darker and edgier cartoon. I think they even released some newer seasons recently that were very dark and edgy. It's a more serious cartoon, and it's seriously highly stylized. Now, the Clone Wars has always been a pretty stylized show. We'll talk about the animation of the more normal Clone Wars series later on in this episode, but the Clone Wars has always had kind of stylized animation, but the original Clone Wars had extremely stylized animation. It was actually the same style of animation that Samurai Jack was. Everyone has these very angular faces. There's lots of straight lines and 90-degree angles. Everything is very angular, and it was 2D animated, and it kind of looks like anime, but it also has its own unique twist on things, so it's not just like anime, and the way the characters move is very fast and weird. It's not supernatural or fluid. It's extremely stylized. I'm honestly kind of surprised and kind of love the fact that Lucasfilm completely okayed this, because I feel like Lucasfilm could have been like, wait a second, this looks weird and wacky. We're not sure if kids are gonna attach onto this strange, hyper-stylized animation form. And I think the fact that Lucasfilm just let the creators do their thing and make this very, very cool looking different style of animation is really cool, and I completely applaud them for that. Now, this show, it had 25 episodes in total. It ran for actually 3 years, from 2003 to 2005. So it actually filled in the gap between Star Wars movies. Of course, 2002 is the year that Attack of the Clones came out, and 2005 is the year that Revenge of the Sith came out. And this kind of bridged the gap. However, the episodes were super short. Some of them are literally 3 minutes long. They're shorter than Pixar shorts short. They are short shorts. They are Larry Bird 1980s basketball shorts short. I'm trying to get crazy with my analogies here just to prove these episodes were real short. The longest episodes, were 12 minutes. They were the longest episodes of this series were the length of SpongeBob or Fairly Odd Parents episodes. Really short stuff, and there wasn't a ton of story. And a lot of it, some episodes literally didn't have dialogue. There's an episode with Mace Windu. No dialogue, no speaking at all, which again, really surprises me that Lucasfilm was like, you know what, this is fine, this is what we're going to let happen, because I appreciate that they let, the artists do their thing and make this very unique and, just oddball cartoon. But it's very weird. It's a very weird thing looking back on, and it was not highly merchandised. Very oddly enough, there really weren't too many toys, and Lego couldn't have cared less about this original Clone Wars show because there were 0 sets made for it at the time. And instead of making, sets based off the Clone Wars, Lego made more original trilogy and prequel era stuff during this time period and made nothing based off this original Clone Wars run. And one final thing I want to mention about this TV series, the original Clone Wars series. This was the first ever appearance of the character General Grievous. He is menacing and terrifying in this show. He has one very memorable moment in the episode where he just goes ham and sneaks around on some clone troopers, and they kind of portray him like he's Batman or something. It's super cool, which kind of makes his appearance in Revenge of the Sith and then the later Clone Wars series disappointing because he kind of becomes more cartoony and stupid. But his original appearance was in this Clone Wars series. And I watched this Clone Wars series when it aired back in the mid-2000s, and I was very young. I was 7, 8 years old, and I wasn't like I am now. Obviously now I follow media and I watch movie trailers and all this stuff, but back then I didn't have access to all these things, and of course social media wasn't nearly as prevalent as it is now, and I had no idea that General Grievous, the character from the Clone Wars series, was going to appear in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So I just remember this crazy hype that I felt when I saw Revenge of the Sith in the theaters, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's General Grievous from the Clone Wars show. Like, it blew my mind as I was 8 years old when that happened. It blew my 8-year-old brain to see this character from a cartoon show appear in the live action film. Like, that was wild to me, and obviously something like that would never happen to me, in this day and age, but back in the day, that blew my mind as a kid. But enough about the original Clone Wars series, because the bulk of this episode is going to be about the more modern Clone Wars series, which didn't even start as a series. This is such a weird history, because normally when you're talking about something like a movie or a TV show, you're like, yeah, it's a movie, it came out, it's a TV show, had a few seasons on this one network, that's about it. The Clone Wars is not like that at all. It flips and flops between networks, different platforms, different lengths. It's wild. It actually has a lot more going on than you might expect. So the Clone Wars, the 3D animated Clone Wars that we all know and maybe love today, was originally a movie. It was a movie in August of 2008, and it was a theatrical release. Not a super successful one. It made like $43 million at the box office. It's bar none the lowest grossing Star Wars quote-unquote film of all time. When I'm ranking the Star Wars movies, though, I don't even consider this movie. It hardly ranks as an actual Star Wars movie, in my opinion. But it was released theatrically. I did see it in theaters, and it's bad. It's really bad. It is not a good movie. And now, don't interpret that as I think the Clone Wars as a whole is bad. There are a ton of bad story arcs throughout the Clone Wars show, but there's also a lot of good ones. The Clone Wars as a whole has some really cool, interesting, compelling storytelling. The movie, however, represents more of the problems I have with the Clone Wars series rather than the strengths of the series. The movie's plot is dumb. It revolves around Rhoda the Hutt, Jabba the Hutt's kid. It is one of the dumbest storylines. It's not good at all. However, this movie, if you love the Clone Wars show, you gotta be thankful for this movie because, well, it launched the show. It actually originally was supposed to be, I think, just like 4 episodes of the show, but they just turned it into a movie. Now, the problem with that is that this movie was legitimately released in theaters. If it was a TV movie, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but since it was released in theaters, it got panned by critics because the animation looked like TV animation, because it literally was TV animation. It's not a very good looking movie for a 3D animated release theatrically. For TV, the animation, there's different standards. Budgets are different. But for theaters, it just did not live up to par. It was released in August, movie flopped, wasn't a big hit, but it did launch the Clone Wars TV series. Now, all of this was planned, of course. They weren't not going to launch the Clone Wars TV show because the Clone Wars TV show came out in October of that year, literally just 2 months later after the movie. Now, the series originally aired on Cartoon Network, which makes a lot of sense. Cartoon Network's where cartoons are. The Clone Wars is ultimately a cartoon, obviously, and it was on Cartoon Network for 5 seasons until the year 2013. I watched it every week for, I think, about 2.5 seasons. And I kind of lost interest in the Clone Wars as I got a little bit older and into middle school, and I, thought I was too old for the Clone Wars. Like, I'm not gonna watch this kiddie cartoon anymore, which that has changed, but, I had my kind of teen angst phase with this Clone Wars show. So I watched it live on air when it originally premiered for about 2.5 seasons. I remember I kind of lost interest when the Zero the Hutt Cy Snoodles episode arc happened in the mid of season 3. I was like, what the heck is this crap? And I stopped watching. I have since rewatched the entire series, and I am currently rewatching it again now, preparing for season 7, which is coming out today. So, I have a newfound affinity for the Clone Wars, but I originally thought I was too big for the Clone Wars. Like, the Clone Wars was below me, which it clearly is not. That was just my naivety when I was younger and an angsty teen. But it ran for 5 seasons on Cartoon Network, and it was all smooth sailing. It was doing pretty well. The first 4 seasons each had 22 episodes, and then season 5 had 20 episodes. And I think season 5 is where you can kind of see the quote-unquote downfall of the Clone Wars start to happen. Like, it kind of starts to spiral out then, because season 5 didn't have a cohesive narrative through the entire season. It was actually just a collection of 4 episode arcs. It had 5 different 4-episode arcs, which some of them are cool and some of them are just terrible. It's very odd how that happened. And then after that, Cartoon Network was like, screw it. We're done. We're done with this Clone Wars show. We don't want to do it anymore. And by this point, Disney has acquired the rights to Star Wars, which we will mention here in just a second as to kind of why the Clone Wars fizzled out. So we have 5 seasons of the Clone Wars with a lot of episodes, and they do have a fully made 6th season that did not air on TV on Cartoon Network. However, in 2013, Netflix acquired the rights to the Clone Wars show. So they put the Clone Wars show on Netflix, which I'm very thankful for, because that's where I ended up watching all of these episodes of the Clone Wars, and I think in 2014 and 15. So Netflix puts the Clone Wars on Netflix, and then in 2014 they air, finally, as a Netflix original series, the final 13 episodes of the Clone Wars from season 6. These episodes, though, they weren't conclusive in any way. There's some good arcs. I really like the Yoda arc in there, and also the Mace Windu Jar Jar Binks arc in season 6 entertains me in kind of the wrong way, but it does. But these episodes weren't really conclusive. They didn't really wrap up the story of the Clone Wars. It was nice to get more, but it was kind of like, still, the storytellers clearly were not able to tell the cohesive narrative they wanted to with the Clone Wars. But after that 6th season, that was the 6th and final season of the Clone Wars. Or so we thought. It literally was for 6 years now. In 2018, though, 2018, we get to Comic-Con, and at the Lucasfilm panel, they announce Clone Wars is coming back for a final season. Now, the reason Clone Wars kind of died is because Disney, after they acquired Lucasfilm, instead of, continuing along with this thing that they didn't make, they're like, you know what? We're going to do our own thing. And at this time, Disney kind of assumed everybody kind of hated the prequel era. Obviously Force Awakens kind of craps on the prequels as films. So Disney is kind of doing the same thing here, where they stopped the Clone Wars and they're like, we're going to do Star Wars Rebels. And that's going to go on Disney XD, their own animation channel, instead of Cartoon Network. So Disney makes Star Wars Rebels, and they cancel the Clone Wars. They get rid of the Clone Wars. They start doing their own thing. They do Rebels because it's more closely tied to the original trilogy, which of course is what Disney was trying to emulate with all the films they've made so far, because they think the prequels are universally hated, even though obviously, as time has gonna tell, especially with the disappointment of the Disney sequel films, the prequels are a lot more popular than I think Disney ever anticipated, which is probably one of the reasons they ended up bringing the Clone Wars back here in 2020. But in 2018, like I already mentioned, at Comic-Con, they announced the Clone Wars is going to finally get a real conclusion with Season 7. And it took a while, it took a couple years, but now we're finally here. And it's February 2020, and Season 7 of the Clone Wars is coming out. Obviously, it's coming out today. I haven't even watched the first episode yet. I have no clue exactly what's going to happen. I mean, obviously, it's going to tie in with episode 3, which I'm excited to see. Hopefully, it's a great season, and we are going to get some Clone Wars stuff based off from LEGO from this season in the very near future. But that is kind of the overall history of the Clone Wars show. It's a more jumbled one than you'd think. It's been on 3 different networks. It was a theatrical movie. It was actually 2 different, completely different series. It's very weird. It's more complicated than you might think. And LEGO has made a lot of sets based off of it. So let's talk about those now. It's now time to talk about the history of LEGO Star Wars The Clone Wars. And I'm about to say something that's an opinion I've kind of formed for myself. It's not something that I think the general public really talks about, but it's something that I genuinely kind of believe. It's bold, it might be rash, but I'm going to say it. I think unofficially, LEGO Star Wars The Clone Wars saved LEGO Star Wars. Not LEGO as a company. It's not like the whole theme of Star Wars or Bionicle that legitimately saved LEGO out of their own dark ages. But I do believe that the Clone Wars sets pretty much helped save LEGO Star Wars as a brand. And here's why. LEGO signed a contract with Lucasfilm to produce sets based off Star Wars. And contracts have endings, right? You know, basketball players, making more basketball analogies. Also, speaking of basketball, shameless plug. Go check out episode 2 of Brickology, which is about LEGO sports. Okay, shameless plug over. Talking about Star Wars The Clone Wars, using a basketball analogy. A basketball player signs a contract for, let's say, 5 seasons. They play that out. At the end of those 5 seasons, you need to either sign a new contract or go sign somewhere else. LEGO and Lucasfilm did the same thing. They signed a big contract, but that contract was coming to an end in the early 2010s. And look, there was no Star Wars movies coming out. You know, there's been a Star Wars movie every year for the past 5 years, and we also have Star Wars TV shows and all of these spin-offs and all of these things now. Like, there's so much Star Wars media now, it seems weird to think about Star Wars media being, you know, not super prevalent. But after Revenge of the Sith, besides maybe a couple of video games like Force Unleashed, there wasn't a whole lot of Star Wars stuff, man. There really wasn't. There wasn't a whole lot for LEGO to do. And I think without the Clone Wars, LEGO would have quickly run out of Star Wars stuff to make. Because eventually you need to make something new. You can make as many X-Wings and Snowspeeders and TIE Fighters as you want, but you can't keep doing that, or else people are going to get bored. And Star Wars The Clone Wars, when it came out in 2008, it was real and it was new Star Wars material that LEGO was like, hey, we can make sets based off of this. And in the year 2012, LEGO re-upped their contract with Lucasfilm for 10 more years. I don't know if that contract has been extended. I'm sure it has. Don't get worried. LEGO Star Wars is not coming to an end anytime soon. But in 2012, 8 years ago now, LEGO signed a 10-year extension with Lucasfilm to continue making sets based off of Star Wars products. And I think the Clone Wars needs a lot of credit for helping that happen, because if the Clone Wars doesn't exist, I don't think LEGO has enough Star Wars material to keep making sets based off of, and I think they might have let that contract expire in the year 2012. But because the Clone Wars was around, LEGO was like confident enough to go out there and be like, you know what? We have enough material to work with. We're going to make sets based off the Clone Wars and, of course, other Star Wars things. So I think unofficially to me, the Clone Wars kind of helped save LEGO Star Wars. So I've already mentioned the Clone Wars film came out in the year 2008, and that just, of course, so happens to be the same year LEGO first started making sets based off the Clone Wars. But the history, again, kind of like the history of the show, is more complicated than you might think. In the first winter wave of 2008, they actually released two kind of Clone Wars sets. The first one was specifically a Clone Wars set, and that was Anakin's Jedi Starfighter. This was marketed as a Clone Wars preview set. It used the 2007 Darth Vader helmet packaging as its packaging, but in the lower left corner, it had the Clone Wars logo and was like, exclusive preview of the Clone Wars. This was an exclusive Clone Wars preview set of Anakin's Jedi Starfighter. It was a $20 set that had 157 pieces. Very cool set. It's actually one of the few Clone Wars sets that's actually gotten remade, and we'll talk about that later on in this episode. It was a good, cool little set back then. However, this set did introduce the Clone Wars style of minifigure, and if you have the time or are able to, if you're driving, don't do this. Don't go online and look it up. But if you're not driving, go look up these Clone Wars minifigures if you don't know what they look like, because they are hideous. They look disgusting. LEGO really tries to emulate the artistic style of the characters from the show, and the show's animation to me has always looked a little bit wooden and kind of painted on and weird, and they have kind of weird shaped faces and eyes, and LEGO tries to do that with printing on LEGO minifigure heads, and it looks awful. It looks so awful and very un-LEGO-like, and it's terrible. I think most of us can agree that the original Clone Wars figures, especially the ones that have very humanoid faces, look horrible, and it was a terrible decision by LEGO to make the figures look like that. They should have stuck to their normal figure style, which unfortunately they did not. And this Anakin's Jedi Starfighter is the first ever appearance of that style of Clone Wars figure. Now, also in that wave, LEGO released a Hellfire droid set that also came with a Spider droid. It was another $20 set. Ironically, had about 100 more pieces than the Jedi Starfighter, and it had more than twice as many figures. It had 5 droid figures in the set. It was essentially just kind of a droid battle pack. And this set originally was marketed as an Episode 2 set. It's Battle Geonosis. It's got Geonosis background. It's 2 things that appeared on Geonosis. It's basically a big battle droid battle pack. It feels like a Geonosis Episode 2 Attack of the Clones set. But the weird thing with both of these winter 2008 sets, after they released the wave in the summer of actual Clone Wars sets that had a Clone Wars style package, they went back and repackaged these 2 sets with that Clone Wars style of packaging, which is kind of blue, has some blue stripes, and a Clone Trooper helmet in the corner as the box art. That's super weird. You don't hear about LEGO changing box art all that often. I think they did it with the Toy Story sets 2010 as well, which we will be talking about LEGO Toy Story here in a couple of weeks, so look forward to that as well. Another shameless plug for other episodes of Brickology. But it's very strange to me that LEGO actually went back and retroactively changed the packaging of these 2 sets, and it's very weird that they made this Hellfire droid and Spider droid set kind of officially a Clone Wars set with the packaging, even though it's clearly based off a scene from Attack of the Clones. But the official LEGO database, Brickset, lists that set as a Clone Wars set and is not listed as an Attack of the Clones set. So, very weird little fun fact about those 2 sets. Now, let's talk about the year 2008 with all these Clone Wars sets. So I mentioned already the Clone Wars film came out in August of 2008. And August 1st, 2008 was the first big wave of LEGO sets based off the Clone Wars. The entire summer wave of LEGO Star Wars that year was completely dedicated to the Clone Wars. And it was kind of a unique mix. It was a mix of sets. 4 of the sets were vehicles that are also in the prequel trilogy films, and the other 4 sets are vehicles that are exclusive to the Clone Wars show, and one to a video game that I'll talk about here in just a second. So the first wave of Clone Wars sets, we had the Homing Spider Droid. This was actually the first ever appearance of the Homing Spider Droid. It was a $30 set, I believe. It came with an exclusive Commander Fox? I think it's Commander Fox minifigure, the red Clone Trooper Commander. Very cool figure exclusive to that set. I actually got this set back in the day. It was a pretty good set for 2008, and it's of course something that's been remade a couple times to be based off of the other prequel trilogy films. This is also the first time we ever got the droid gunship. This is the first time ever. They've since gone on to remake that twice based off Revenge of the Sith, but this version was based off the Clone Wars. It also retailed for $30 US, and I believe it's one of the few LEGO sets ever that has 329 pieces, which of course means a lot to me because I'm LEGO Elite 329. However, I never got this set. The figures in this set kind of sucked. It only came with Battle Droids, so that's kind of disappointing. So we got those 2 sets. Those are the first ever appearances of those vehicles in LEGO form, but those vehicles had already become famous from the prequel trilogy films. Next up, we got the first remake of the ATTE. The first ATTE came out in the year 2003. That ATTE was based off of Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. This version was based off the Clone Wars. It was the first ever set to come with a Captain Rex minifigure, which is super cool. It also came with Anakin, Ahsoka, and Rhoda the Hutt, the aforementioned little baby Hutt that is so disgusting, a creepy piece mold that I do kind of wish I had that piece in my collection. It came in this ATTE set and one more set that we'll mention here in just a second. This one changed up a few things. It also came with a STAP, a single trooper aerial platform, for a battle droid, and this time it was in blue instead of being in brown like the Episode 1 version of the STAP. It was a pretty cool vehicle. It was a $90 set with about 800 pieces. I never got this set. I wish I had this set, but I do have two ATTEs for the version that came out in 2013, so I really don't need this set, but it was a pretty cool set. But the biggest set of the initial Clone Wars line was the $120 Republic gunship. Now, the gunship has been very prevalent in Star Wars recently. It recently just won the LEGO Ideas Star Wars voting contest to be one of the next LEGO Ideas UCS Star Wars sets, which is super cool. I'm super hyped about that. It was my personal choice, and I'm really excited. The gunship is one of my favorite vehicles in all Star Wars. I think it's a magnificent looking ship. It has an amazing appearance in the actual films. It's such a cool vehicle. And this set here was the first version, the first remake of it from the 2002 version. Now, it's technically a different version of this vehicle. The 2002 version is the low altitude one that's not actually a spaceship, it's just, an in-atmosphere vehicle. This version of the gunship, the attack gunship based off the Clone Wars, is different. It doesn't have those ball turrets, and it actually has more doors so the entire thing can seal up and actually leave the atmosphere. So this gunship can come from a Venator-class Star Destroyer and go into the atmosphere. So this is actually, technically speaking, a spaceship, but it's still more of a in-atmosphere type of vehicle. And this set here actually was the first appearance ever of an Asajj Ventress minifigure, which is super cool. The first ever appearance of Plo Koon, which is an iconic Jedi, and the first ever appearance of Commander Cody, who is still a pretty rare character to find in LEGO form. So, very, very cool minifigure lineup. You also got Obi-Wan and an additional clone trooper. And this set here was voted on by my fans on Instagram. Shameless plug to go follow LEGO Elite 329 Instagram. This set was voted on by my fans as the best set based off Star Wars, The Clone Wars. And I would have to agree. It's a fantastic set. It's an iconic set. And this set, additionally, means a lot to me. One thing I love to do here in Brickology is whenever I have a fun little antidote Antidote. I always say that. I always say antidote. I get the word anecdote and antidote mixed up all the time. I have a fun little anecdote, sorry about that, about this set. It's going to become an inside joke here in Brickology. I'm just going to keep saying antidote instead of anecdote. But little story to tell about this set. So the year is 2008. I was 11 years old, and 11-year-olds don't normally have $120 to go below on a big Lego Star Wars set. If I was going to get that set, it had to be for Christmas or something. Someone would have to buy it for me. I did not have money for that set. But my older brother, who is 6 years older than me, he was currently in the process of applying to colleges. It was his senior year of high school, and he was applying to colleges. And the college, like his dream school that he wanted to go to, was Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. And he basically told me, he's like, hey Lee, if I get into Stanford, which was kind of a reach school for him, he's like, hey, if I get into Stanford, I'm going to buy you this gunship set. Not entirely sure why he did it. He's just being a good older brother, I guess. But that's the bet, that's the guarantee he made me. If he got into Stanford, he would buy me this set, which I guess was kind of, maybe some of his reasoning was to get me really excited about this particular set, because all of a sudden I'm super into and like, wait, how are you getting to Stanford? What are you going to do to get into Stanford? Like all of a sudden I'm super passionate about his college admission experience. But like I said, Stanford, first off, is like one of the top 5 schools in the United States. It's a historically great school. He did not get into Stanford. He ended up going to Duke University. It all worked out fine. He loved Duke. We loved Duke. All worked out fine, but he didn't get into Stanford. And he was kind of bummed out that he didn't get into his dream school, but it was a reach school for him. And, because he didn't get into Stanford, I got bummed out because I'm being super selfish. And, he said he was going to get me the Republic gunship, but didn't get into Stanford. And I was like, oh, well, guess I'm not getting the Republic gunship. But a couple days later, he's like, hey, Lee, come outside. He takes me to his trunk of his car, opens it up, and there it is. The Republic gunship set, the 2008 Clone Wars Republic gunship set. Despite the fact that my older brother did not even get into Stanford, he still just bought me this $120 set, which is a lot for, a high school kid to buy. He just bought me that set, and it wasn't even Christmas time yet. Like, it was just a random gift. And that's just one of the nicest things that anyone's ever done for me. It meant so much to me at the time. I'm getting a little choked up about this story. It's such a great story. I love that story. So that set, it was voted on by my fans as the best set, and I am 100% inclined to agree with that statement because that set really means a lot to me personally. Now, the remaining 4 Clone Wars sets that came out in the summer of 2008 were brand new vehicles for the Clone Wars film. We had the Magna Guard Starfighter, which was actually the first Clone Wars set that I purchased. I saved up all my allowance to buy this set. It was a $45 set, which is kind of a weird price point. LEGO doesn't normally do multiples of 5. It's usually, I guess all multiples of 10 or multiples of 5, but they normally do it, $40, $50, not a $45 set. But this set was the first ever Clone Wars set I got. It's the first ever set to include the Magna Guards, had a brand new cockpit piece. The design of this set still holds up really well today. It's a fantastic looking vehicle. I love this set. I love this ship. I would love to see it remade. It's a very cool set. For $55, they made the V19 Torrent, which is a set to this day that I go on eBay and look at auctions for. Because I still want this set, man. I'm sad I don't have this vehicle in my collection. I got the Brickmaster mini model version of it, but I don't have this version of the V19 Torrent, and I wish I did. It's such a cool looking ship. And, with the Clone Wars coming back, I'm going to go ahead and guess LEGO is going to remake this vehicle within the next few years, so maybe I should just hold off and wait for the remake. But it was a great set. It was $55. It's the only minifigure scale version of this ship they've ever made. And one kind of weird fact, this set came with a clone pilot, and that's it. One minifigure. In the day and age of social media, if LEGO released a $55 Star Wars set that only had one minifigure, they would be ripped to shreds. I mean, seriously, ripped to shreds by the online LEGO Star Wars fan community. People would be so livid about that. Continuing along, we had a store exclusive that was the Republic Fighter Tank for $50. It had 592 pieces. This set only came with 2 generic clone troopers, which was a little disappointing. The figures weren't great, but I loved this set. I got this set, and the reason I love this set because while it was based off the Clone Wars TV show, I love this vehicle because this vehicle actually appeared in the Clone Wars video game that came out, I think, in the year 2003. That's a video game I played all the time on my Nintendo GameCube. I have tons of nostalgia for that game, and this vehicle, the Republic Fighter Tank, is like iconic in that game. And when it finally came out in Lego form, it was like a surreal moment for me. I love that set. It actually was remade into another set in 2017, but it was much smaller. It was half the size. It was a $25 set, and I believe to this day this is still the best version of this vehicle. And the final 2008 Clone Wars set was the Twilight. Now the Twilight is kind of like the flagship vehicle of the Clone Wars movie and parts of the Clone Wars TV series. It's the vehicle that Anakin and Ahsoka and R2-D2 fly around on in the movie. And for a flagship vehicle, you know, when you think of flagship vehicles in Star Wars, you think of the X-Wing and of course the Millennium Falcon, right? Or you think of something like the Razor Crest from The Mandalorian or the Ghost from Star Wars Rebels. The Twilight, while it has a sick name, the Twilight is an awesome name, this vehicle is hideous. It's such an ugly vehicle. You know, Lego and Star Wars, they're always going for this, like, our main vehicle is a quote-unquote hunk of junk. Like, the Millennium Falcon is supposed to be a piece of junk, but the Millennium Falcon looks cool. The Razor Crest is an old and rickety vehicle, but it looks cool. Same thing with the Ghost. This vehicle is old and rickety, and it looks dumb. It's such an ugly vehicle, and the letter representation is not terrible, but it didn't have a windscreen piece, which I always am bothered by that when Lego doesn't include a windscreen piece in a Star Wars set, so it kind of, the suspension of disbelief is hurt a little bit there because all of a sudden these characters can't, you know, they're gonna, you know, to me, in my weird imagination, they can't survive out in space if it's not completely airtight, right? So this is such an ugly vehicle. It didn't have any exclusive figures. It had Anakin I just combined Ahsoka and exclusive Ahsoka, R2-D2 and Murder the Hutt. It was $100, had about 900 pieces. Ugly vehicle. I never got it. I have no desire for this. I hope they never remake this. Ugly, ugly vehicle. Now, we really just dove in depth with that original year for the Clone Wars, which I think was necessary, but Lego over time has released 72 sets based off Star Wars The Clone Wars, and if I sat here and I broke down every single set like I just did for all of those sets, this podcast would be like 3 to 4 hours long, and I don't think any of you want to listen to that. I don't think Spotify would let me upload that, so instead, I'm going to quickly kind of hit some of the highlights for the Clone Wars sets from here on out. The year 2009 saw the Clone Trooper Battle Pack. Now, the first Clone Trooper Battle Pack was based off Revenge of the Sith that came out in 2007, but this Clone Trooper Battle Pack, that was the first ever Battle Pack to have Phase 1 Clone Troopers, is probably the most iconic Battle Pack ever made. It's a relatively mediocre walker build, very typical Battle Pack fare, but it came with 3 normal clones, a set of Clone Trooper armor, and a Clone Trooper gunner. It was a fantastic battle pack. It was only $10, and this battle pack is like the OG let's build a clone army extremely efficiently battle pack, and I wish that Lego would come out with something like it in 2020. What a fantastic battle pack. Now moving on, we also got in 2009 the Separatist AAT, which is the biggest ever version of the AAT in Lego form. The original version was $20, 2015 version was $25, and they're remaking the Separatist AAT this summer, at least the rumor lists say that, which is going to be $40. So that version will probably be smaller than this version. It's the biggest version of the AAT ever. It was the first set that come with the kind of weird looking Clone Wars Yoda minifigure. It's a cool set though, very cool looking set, very good design that still holds up today. Also in that way, we got the $60 Republic attack shuttle that I did get, which is a vehicle I would love to see remade in modern LEGO form because it doesn't quite hold up here in 2020, and that set had Clone Wars Mace Windu. That year we also got Count Dooku's Solar Sailor, which was another $60 set, and it's the only appearance of this vehicle ever in LEGO form. And it's a vehicle that's fairly prevalent in Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars show. Now, I'm not really sure how LEGO would go about designing this vehicle because of the weird sail. It just wouldn't really fit LEGO style, and they completely omitted the sail from the design of this set, but it's a set that I kind of wish that I had acquired back in the day. We also got the Pirate Tank, which was a $40 set, which was a pretty ugly vehicle, but it is the only LEGO set ever to come with a minifigure of Hondo Ohnaka, who has kind of gone on to become this like cult favorite Star Wars character, and he's now even the host of the Millennium Falcon ride at Galaxy's Edge in Disney World, which I mentioned I just went to this past weekend. It was kind of surprising to see all this Hondo stuff around at Disney World. So hopefully we get a more modern version of a Hondo minifigure here in the future, but the Pirate Tank is the only LEGO set ever to include Hondo. We got the Republic Y-Wing in 2009 as well, which is a very cool vehicle. And we also got the Separatist Shuttle, which is a great vehicle that I love. But the two big sets this year from the Clone Wars, we got a $120 Venator class Republic Attack Cruiser, which of course is kind of like the precursor to the Star Destroyer. And it's an iconic vehicle from the prequels and the Clone Wars, and it kind of makes me sad this is the only version of this that we've ever gotten, because they've never remade it. They've never remade it. LEGO, if you're listening, please remake this vehicle. I want this vehicle so bad in my collection, and it goes for a lot online now, and I think it could use a modern update. I really hope LEGO ends up remaking this ship here in the near future. And then the only UCS set based off the Clone Wars, which it's not really a UCS set because it's minifig scale, but it was marketed as such, is the UCS Republic Dropship and AT-OT Walker. It was $250. It was two massive vehicles, and the Republic Dropship could pick up the AT-OT Walker itself. It's an insane vehicle. It's quite the feat of LEGO design work and engineering. I really wish I had this set in my collection. I just could not afford something that cost $250 in the year 2009. Now, 2010 was another pretty big year for LEGO sets based off the Clone Wars. We got our first remake of Grievous's Starfighter, and this was a much bigger version that introduced a new cockpit piece and a brand new mold for General Grievous, or a brand new set of molds for General Grievous that are still being used today, and there will be a 2020 remake of this vehicle. We got Cad Bane's Speeder, which was the first set to include Cad Bane. He had two new pieces for his breathing apparatus and, of course, his crazy cowboy hat. I actually just got this set off eBay, and I will be doing a Throwback Thursday review for it next week, probably. And, of course, if you're watching this after listening to this after the fact, it might already be up on my YouTube channel and my Instagram TV, so go check that out. Same thing goes for the Freako Speeder, the vehicle based off an episode in Season 1 of the Clone Wars that was a $25 set. I also just got that. In the summer, we got Plo Koon's Jedi Starfighter. Now, they made a ton of Jedi Starfighters based off the Clone Wars. We got Anakin's, we got Plo Koon's, we got Ahsoka's, we got Mace Windu's, we got Sassy Tin's, and we got a remake of Anakin's. That's 6 different Jedi Starfighters based off the Clone Wars Cartoon Network series, 3D animated series alone. But I'm not going to focus too much on any of the other ones. I do have a little anecdote. I'm sorry about that. I just keep messing those two words up. I have a little story about this set. My parents, for I think their 25th wedding anniversary, treated themselves to a trip to Paris, France. And back in the day, this still happens sometimes, but back in the day, this always happened. LEGO Star Wars sets were released in June in Europe, and they weren't released until August in America. But my parents were there in June, because that's when their anniversary is. And I was like, yo, pick me up a new LEGO Star Wars set. And this is, my YouTube channel was still fairly young, and they got me Plo Koon Jedi Starfighter. They got me this set in Europe and brought it over to me, and I was the first person to review that vehicle online on YouTube in English. There were some French and German reviews, but in English, LEGO 329 was the first person to upload a video review of that set. I was still super young. It's still one of my early videos, but you can still find it on my channel. I think it has tens of thousands of views. It was super cool. I love that story. I love that I got that set super early and was able to review that set very early. It's a great Plo Koon Jedi Starfighter, and it's a very cool looking ship, although it does look a little bit outdated. Now, finally, for 2010, one set that did get a lot of votes for one of the best sets based off the Clone Wars is the 2010 Clone Turbo Tank. This is a cool set. It came with Ayla Secura. It was a big set, $120. Big turbo tank. It's much bigger than the version that came out in 2016. I think this version of the turbo tank is a little skinny and the wheels look awkward, and I think it's actually a pretty overrated set. Don't crucify me for that. I know people love this set. I don't love this set. I personally skipped on this set and prioritized some other vehicles, but we did get that big clone turbo tank in the year 2010. 2011 is kind of the year where you start to see the Clone Wars sets fizzle out just a bit. There weren't quite as many. So 2011, we got stuff like the first ever Mandalorian Battle Pack, the Bounty Hunter Gunship, the Jedi Shuttle. One of the best ones, in my opinion, of course, is the Republic Frigate, which I did buy for $110, but unfortunately I destroyed it because I was a dumb child when I bought it. I really regret that because I wish I still had that vehicle on display in my collection. And we also got the Sith Night Speeder there in the Geonosian Starfighter. There were a handful of cool Clone Wars sets that year, but these years were when the show was getting into kind of its middle of its run, and Cartoon Network was, nearing, towards canceling the series, and of course Disney acquires Star Wars in 2012, so 2012 is really the first year we were like, oh, okay, we're starting to see very few Clone Wars sets. There was a couple battle packs, there was Geonos and Canon, and then we got the Malevolence, which was a $120 set that was 4 years too late because this vehicle appears in the first few episodes of the Clone Wars TV series, and it makes no sense why they made a set of it 4 years after the fact, but it's a pretty cool vehicle, and I wish I had this vehicle in my collection. I've definitely considered buying this set on eBay over the years, and additionally another set that I would like to get on eBay at some point is Pre Vizsla's Mandalorian Starfighter, which Pre Vizsla, the character, is voiced by Jon Favreau, and of course Jon Favreau is the creator of the Mandalorian series on Disney+, so kind of a fun little connection there, and that's the only set that ever came with the Pre Vizsla figure. 2013, a little bit of a resurgence. They had a little bit of a resurgence for the Clone Wars. This is when we first saw the Clone Wars sets include Phase 2 Clone Troopers. So we got an AT-RT in blue that had a 501st Clone Trooper. Also, we got a 501st Clone Trooper in the Z95 Headhunter set that was $50, which also came with a Pong Krell minifigure, and with the Umbaran arc was represented pretty well with these sets because we got the Umbaran Cannon, which is a very cool set that I'm glad I still have built, along with the Bark Speeder, which we're getting a remake of the Bark Speeder here in 2020, but this Bark Speeder set originally retailed for $30, and now it's worth over $100. So if you have this set new or sealed or even built complete, it is worth a lot of money. It is appreciated in value quite well, probably because of that Captain Rex minifigure. And then we also got the Mandalorian Speeder that had the Clone Wars Darth Maul with the crazy robot legs and the Death Watch Mandalorians, and we got the Skyhopper set as well that came with Cad Bane and Disguised Obi-Wan, and a Bounty Hunter, which is an extremely ugly vehicle that I skipped on literally because the vehicle is just so hideous. 2014, we only got 2 Clone Wars sets. We got the Clone Cannon, which is a very cool set, and it came with Wolfpack Clone Troopers and Plo Koon. Very, very cool set. And we got the Coruscant Police Gunship, which is a set that's appreciated in value a lot, and it makes me sad because I love this vehicle. It's a very unique vehicle, and it looks really cool, and the vehicle is even seen fitted for the Empire in Star Wars Rebels as well. So I really, really wish I had this vehicle in my collection, and I definitely regret skipping on it in the year 2014. But after that, no Clone Wars sets, man, for a while. We were pretty much done. LEGO had moved on. Star Wars was doing Star Wars Rebels, and of course the upcoming sequel trilogy. Rebels was all the rage. That's what LEGO focused their budget on instead of the Clone Wars, which kind of sucks. However, in 2015, this is one of the most random LEGO Star Wars sets of all time. Remember at the beginning of this episode when I mentioned that original Samurai Jack-esque Clone Wars series? Well, they made a set based off of that 12 years after the fact. For no reason, LEGO comes out with Anakin's custom Jedi Starfighter from that series. And this is a crazy set because this is the set that changed the tide of Clone Wars minifigures. The Rebels figures did not have the weird animated style, and then the Clone Wars set, this Clone Wars set here, got rid of that weird animation style for the figures as well. Anakin was remade without his weird Clone Wars look. Same thing goes for Asajj Ventress that was included in this set. It was a $40 set. It's a very good rendition of this vehicle. It's a pretty cool looking vehicle in the movie as well, and a very cool looking set. It was just so random that it came out in 2015. If it had come out in 2004 or 5, it would have made sense. But 15? That's random, but I'm not complaining. Now, wrapping up the Clone Wars sets here. In 17, we got Yoda's Starfighter from those final episodes of Season 6. Kind of weird. It came with the more normal Yoda figure instead of the Clone Wars version and R2-D2. And then 2018, we got Anakin's Jedi Starfighter, the first remake of a Clone Wars specific set. And that one had a more updated version of Anakin. And weird thing is, it had no inflation. It was the same price. It was still a $20 set, even though it had almost 100 more pieces than the original version. So that's kind of a fun little fact about that. Also, we got a $30 set in 2018 of Grievous's Speeder, which was a 157 piece set, I believe, for $30. And it had an updated version of Mace Windu from the Clone Wars and Grievous as well in the more normal style. Really horrible price set, but it's a pretty cool looking vehicle. And this summer, we are getting rumored Clone Wars sets. Clone Wars sets will be returning, so this episode, is to be continued. Maybe for the future, we shall see. So there's some really cool stuff coming out for LEGO Star Wars and the Clone Wars, and of course, Season 7 comes out today. I'm very excited to see where that leads and what sets that leads up to. But that's it. That's all the LEGO Star Wars, the Clone Wars set. It's a deep, it's an interesting, it's a rich history. The Clone Wars has a lot more going on than you might expect. And thank you guys so much for staying with me through this journey. That was a lot. My mouth is exhausted. I am very cold because I turn off the air conditioning to record Brickology and it's snowing outside. So I am very cold currently. I'm kind of shivering. While recording this episode, my mouth is foaming, but thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Brickology. I really appreciate it. And while you're at it, go check out my YouTube channel, like my Facebook page, follow me on Instagram. I post a lot of stuff over there, and if you're a real one, if you're a really big fan, maybe even consider becoming a Patreon supporter, because every small donation helps me make cool content like the Brickology podcast. Thank you so much for tuning into Brickology today. I hope to hear from you guys next week with episode 5. This is Lego Lee 329, Lee Parham, signing off. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Peace out.